Good morning and welcome to worship. I am so thankful we have this video technology that I can join you for worship as we take a little vacation time. I'm thankful for Hank Bernard for leading worship and all our musicians, all those behind the scene. Thank you for making worship possible, and thank you for being here. We continue with our series on the radical sayings of Jesus, and we begin with a story. A student in mathematics was on his way to take his final test for his PhD degree. Unfortunately, he arrived late. Everybody else in the classroom were already taking the test. On the blackboard were 3 problems. He sat down and immediately began working on those 3 problems. He worked feverishly for an hour and a half. Of course, everybody else in the class had finished and left, and he was still there working. He thought to himself, what an idiot I am. I'm the last one here taking this test. I know I came in late, but I must be pretty dumb because I'm still working on this last question. Of course, he finished the first 2 problems and was having trouble with the last problem, but he decided to hand in his test, thinking that he's going to flunk. There's no way you can do 2/3 of a test and pass. He was very upset and very troubled. He walked up to the professor and said, I didn't finish the last problem. Would you please let me finish it and bring it to you later, please? I'll get the 3rd problem done and bring it to your office. Well, the professor gave him permission to do so. The student handed in the first 2 answers and calculations to the problem and went back to work on the 3rd problem. He worked all afternoon. He worked all evening. He worked until 11 o'clock that night. He finished, rushed over to the professor's office, which of course was closed. He slipped his answers and all his calculations under the door of the professor's office and went home exhausted. Early the next day, his phone rang. It was the professor who excitedly said to him, young man, you're a genius. You are brighter than bright. I've never seen anything like this before. The young man said, what do you mean? The professor responded, well, the first 2 problems on the board were the test. The 3rd problem was just a mind teaser. I've never had a student finish that problem before. No student of mine has ever gotten it right. You've done something that no other student has done before. The student who had come late to class to take that test never heard that the 3rd problem was impossible to solve. He never heard the instructions that it was a mind teaser. He never heard that it was an impossible challenge. That's the power of believing. If you believe a pill can cure you, then chances are it can. If you believe you can solve a difficult problem, then chances are you can. There is power in believing. We know that. We know that faith makes the impossible possible. We experience the power of faith in our lives every day. We see signs of it every day. We know the power of believing. Now, to misquote Henry Ford, if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. Henry Ford said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. I just put it into faith language. Today's reading from Mark's Gospel is a faith story. Actually, it's 2 faith stories in one. It's printed on your handout if you'd like to follow along, or simply listen as I read it to you. Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with Jesus. My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she may be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was free from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," the disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Here ends our reading for this day. Ever feel like the bucket in your life has a hole in it? That it leaks out faster than you can fill it up? No matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, where you go, what you try, you just can't fill it up. Work, play, family, friends, they all leave you feeling empty and restless and searching. You can't seem to get enough. The outflow is greater than the inflow. You're left drained of life, tired and weak, frustrated and hopeless, angry and resentful, sorrowful and grieving, fearful that you will never have the life you want. I've heard that from many people lately. And if that's you, then perhaps you can relate to the people in our gospel reading this morning. We don't know her name. We don't know where she came from. She could be any one of us. She's anonymous. Just another face in the crowd. We know that she is sick and desperate and in need. She's been bleeding for 12 years. That's 4,380 days. In all that time, no one's been able to help her. She spent all that she had, time, money, energy, and she's only gotten worse. Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, it's always the same: blood. She's a walking fountain of blood. Her condition is more than physical. She's losing more than blood. She is losing her life. Its warmth, its vitality, its fruitfulness. It's a spiritual matter. Life and death are always spiritual matters. At one level, this is a story of an individual woman. On another level, it's the human story. Her story is our story. It's as much about men as it is about women. Drained of life, we just go through the motions. Alive, but not really living. I can't tell you how many people have told me they feel that way lately. Feeling disconnected, isolated, and in need. Now, we may try to convince ourselves that once this happens or that happens, everything will be better. As soon as he changes, or as soon as she changes, or as soon as the economy gets better, or as soon as I get a better job, or as soon as I have enough money, or as soon as I have enough time, as soon as I get this project done, as soon as I fill in the blanks. We all have our as soon as's. I'm sure the bleeding woman spent many days over those 4,380 days thinking as soon as. Today, however, is different. Something has changed in her. Something has shifted. She heard about Jesus. Maybe she heard about his teachings, or about him casting out demons, or about him healing the sick, or cleansing the lepers, or calming the storms on the sea. We don't know what she heard about Jesus, but it was enough to make her believe. To make her believe that she is more than a bleeding woman. She would no longer wait for others to fix her life. She refused to be a victim, identified with the circumstances of her life. Today, she would reach beyond those circumstances and literally take matters into her own hand. Deep within her, she believes, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Talk about faith. No matter how much we bleed, the truth of those words flow through our veins too. She knows, somehow she knows and believes that Jesus offers a life that is unleakable, a life that can never be drained from her. So she touched his cloak. In that moment, she was transfused. She was transfused by and with the power of God. It was enough to touch. The connection was made, a relationship established, life no longer leaking out of her, but flowing into her. The hemorrhaging stopped, and the healing began. Who touched my clothes? Jesus asked. That's radical, because everybody around him was touching his clothes. But here's the thing. He was calling her out. He would not allow her to remain a nameless face in the crowd. He would not allow her to drift into anonymity. He named her daughter. and sent her on a path of peace with a new life. She would no longer be the bleeding woman. She is now a daughter, a child of God. She has an identity, a place, a purpose, and a relationship. She has been healed and made whole. She is now fully alive and free to live life to the fullest in peace. That's the unleakable life that Jesus offers to us. We no longer have to live a life being drained of life through baptism. Jesus calls us sons and daughters. Through baptism, we are filled up with God's grace and love. Through worship, here in this place, Jesus comes and He touches us through word and music, through a meal, through forgiveness, through the community of faith. We are touched by God in this place. We're here, and we are invited to reach out beyond the circumstances in our lives. We no longer live as soon as lives. We can take matters into our own hand. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're in control of the uncontrollable. There's a lot of things in life that are totally out of our control. What I'm saying is we have a choice and a responsibility. We can put our faith into action and do something or not. The woman put her faith into action and did something. She reached out and touched Jesus and was healed. Jairus did the same thing, by the way. He put his faith into action and he reached out to Jesus. He was a man on a mission. He had this storm that blew into his life. His little girl was about to die, and he was not ready to let her go. He was desperate. But here's the thing. Jairus, through his pride, his self-reliance, even his leadership position, out the window for his daughter. You see, Jairus was a leader in the local synagogue. This was not a good time for him to be seen or approach Jesus. The Jewish rulers were violently opposed to Jesus. He was messing with everything that was sacred to them. So if someone was associated with Jesus, they were seen as an enemy. To be seen in his presence was bad enough. But to invite him into your home, that would have been disastrous for Jairus. And yet, he did it anyway. Sometimes we may come with the same desperate need that Jairus had, or the woman had, forgetting what the crowd might think about us and turning to the one who can bring hope into our hopeless situations. Of course, word comes that his daughter is dead. And Jesus says something radical. He says, don't be afraid, just believe. That's exactly what the woman did. She wasn't afraid of Jesus. She believed that touching Jesus could heal her, and it did. Don't be afraid, Jesus says. Afraid of what? Of death? Of life? Of Jesus? Of losing control? Of losing a son or a daughter? It's as if Jesus is saying we need not be afraid of anything. Jesus has this. He's got it. Whatever it is that is troubling us, there is no problem that Jesus can't solve. Just believe. Believe what? Believe Jesus. Wherever your faith journey takes you this week, don't be afraid. Just believe. So says Jesus. Amen.